This is an MJA Inc. Investigations warning. This MJA podcast is rated E for explicit. Some details of a case and language used on this podcast might be upsetting to some of our listeners. Listeners' discretion is advised. And for those who are still with us, kick back and enjoy the show. When there is an ending, there was a beginning. Every victim has a picture to paint. Every true crime has its time and place. Please join our MJ podcast, the series Deep into the Woods, Missing Persons, Unsolved Crimes, and the Does. Welcome to our MJ podcast, this series, Unsolved Crimes, Episode 11, Part 7, 5 Washington Unsolved Homicide Coldcases. My name is Mark, and I will be your host for tonight's show. Joining me later will be our co-host, Olivia. We are coming to you from Hudson, Florida. If you are curious about facts surrounding the number of homicides in Washington by year, there are several law enforcement agency websites that provide reports and statistics. The Federal Bureau of Investigations publishes a uniform crime report each year that details the crimes, crime rates, and crime locations in each state, county, and city. According to Project Cold Case, there were 10,409 homicides in Washington between 1980 and 2019. Around 7,472 of those killings were solved throughout the years, leaving around 2,937 unsolved murders in the state of Washington. Welcome to Washington. 5 Unsolved Homicide Cold Cases. Case 1. In June 1984, 30-year-old Debbie Fenner was found dead in Spokane, Washington. Case 2. In January 1986, Helen and Adrian Anderson were found murdered in their home located in Bremerton, Washington. Case 3. On October 22nd, 1988, the body of 20-year-old Robin Kenworthy was found murdered outside of Index, Washington. Case 4. On June 4th, 1989, 13-year-old Russell Evans was found murdered. Evans was found beaten and ran over in the street after a hit and run in Spokane, Washington. Case 5. On January 22, 2007, Karen Bodine was found murdered by an old stone quarry in Rochester, Washington. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, Olivia will be on the line, and we will profile 5 unsolved homicide cold cases. Be back in a moment. Welcome to our MJ podcast, this series, Unsolved Crimes. This is episode 11, part 7, 5 Washington Unsolved Homicide Cold Cases. We have Olivia on the line. How are you doing on this fine evening?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm just peachy. Okay, let's dig into these cold cases. Welcome to the state of Washington. Unsolved homicide. Welcome to Spokane, Washington. Case 1. Omaha, Nebraska family seeks answers to a woman's murder 39 years ago. In June 1984, an Omaha, Nebraska woman was found dead in Spokane, Washington. The 30-year-old Debbie Fenner was brutally murdered. The Fenner family doesn't know of anyone who would want to kill Debbie. The Fenner family is trying to get through the murder of Debbie. In 1984, Debbie Fenner left Omaha for Spokane. No one knows why. Shortly thereafter, Debbie Fenner was murdered, for the 30-year-old had been stabbed multiple times. Debbie's family does not believe she left Omaha on her own. The 30-year-old Debbie Fenner didn't have a lot of money, and at the time, she didn't have a car. Spokane police tell the Fenner family the murder investigation is still an open case. Omaha, Nebraska police said detectives here have no involvement in the investigation. The victim's family is hoping that someone in Omaha will remember something about Debbie and when she left town and who she left with. The murder of Debbie Fenner is still unsolved.
Welcome to Bremerton, Washington. Unsolved Homicides Case 2. The 1986 murder of Helene and Adrian Anderson. In January 1986, the town of Bremerton in Washington state was left petrified. This was after Helene Anderson and her 4-year-old daughter, Adrian, were found murdered in cold blood inside their home. Helene's ex, Kenny Hale, discovered the horrifying murder. Since then, authorities have been trying to make sense of the incident. To investigators, they have a vivid picture of the slayings. At the time of her death, Helene Nikki Anderson resided with her daughter, Adrian and her 8-month-old son Marcus on Magnolia Drive in Bremerton, Washington. Although she was co-parenting Adrian along with her ex, Kenny Hale, Helene was engaged and shared Marcus with her fiancé, who was stationed in San Diego for the U.S. Navy. Nikki Anderson worked at the local Arby's to make ends meet, and reports state that Helene was preparing to move to California with her children in order to live with her fiancé. Kenny mentioned that on January 29, 1986, he spent the entire day with Nikki and Adrian and was supposed to be back the following day. However, many people came knocking for Helene the next day but got no response. When Kenny entered the house on January 30th, 1986, all he heard was the sound of Marcus crying. The house was pitch black, and Kenny reached out before stumbling over his daughter's leg, which felt solid and cold. Scared and anxious, Kenny went inside and found both mother and daughter slain in cold blood. Helene's infant son was still alive, and Kenny picked him up before handing him to a neighbor. When the police arrived on the scene, they determined that both victims were strangled to death. Although there were no signs of a break-in, and authorities believe Helene knew her attacker, it seemed like they were involved in a major physical struggle before the killings. Nothing was stolen, but investigators ascertained that the crime was of a sexual nature directed towards Helene. The case still remains unsolved, and it's an active investigation, and the police are confident about reaching a conclusion soon. Authorities did manage to get a partial foreign DNA sample from the murder scene, but with no eyewitnesses or other leads, progression slowed down to a crawl. The ex-husband, Kenny Hale, was looked at as a person of interest, as he did not have a good relationship with law enforcement from the beginning of the investigation. Kenny seemed impatient when questioned and claimed that the real murderer would manage to get away if cops kept fixating on him. Once Kenny's DNA sample proved to be different from the one found at the crime scene, he was freed from all suspicion. For years, the case sat dormant until Detective Mja Garland entered the equation. Determined to find a solution to the case, Detective Mja interviewed Helene's acquaintances and even made up a list of several serial killers active in the area at the time of the murders. When asked about the DNA sample and evidence, the detective claimed that the sample was not complete enough to run against the offender database or use genetic genealogy to create a family tree. The only way to get a match was to make a one-to-one comparison with another sample. Although there is a person of interest as of this moment, it's a strange mix of it's not somebody that's so close to her that it becomes an obvious suspect, but it is someone close enough to her that she put a certain amount of trust in this person, and they betrayed it in the most heinous way. Police are determined to see an end to this case and still hope to get justice for Helene Anderson and Adrian.
Welcome to Index Washington Unsolved Homicide. Case 3. On September 28, 1988, 20-year-old Robin Kenworthy called her mother, Judy Kenworthy, who stated her daughter Robin sounded wore out. The 20-year-old Kenworthy wanted to come home. Robin Kenworthy needed a break from the streets and her on-again and off-again love affair with heroin. The 20-year-old Kenworthy planned to catch a bus on Aurora Avenue. Her mom never heard from her again. The 20-year-old Kenworthy was known to hang out around Pioneer Square. It was known Avenue in the University District and the Fremont Fellowship in Seattle, Washington. Robin Kenworthy was an exotic dancer in Seattle and King County and was known to use the names Venus and Ginger. The 20-year-old Kenworthy's body was found on October 22nd, 1988, 11 miles up a road near two logging roads outside of Index, Washington. The 20-year-old Kenworthy was naked. Someone dumped Kenworthy's body on a pile of brush and logs. Investigators couldn't determine how 20-year-old Robin Kenworthy had died. Detectives in the past aired suspicions that Kenworthy may have died at the hands of serial killer Gary Ridgway. The 20-year-old Kenworthy fit the description of the women Ridgway hunted. Snohomish County detectives interviewed Ridgway after he admitted to killing 48 women in King County. Ridgway gave no hint that Kenworthy would be among his victims. Robin's mother doesn't think she'll ever know who killed her child. Too many years have passed. Robin's drug addiction led her down a dark, twisted path littered with dealers and drug addicts and men who paid for sex. Those kind of people usually don't live long enough to give up their secrets. Judy Kenworthy said her daughter Robin was sensitive, beautiful, and intelligent. Robin was great with kids and with old people, and she had a great sense of humor. The 20-year-old Robin Kenworthy had a lot of potential that was thrown away first by her and then by whoever killed her. If you have any info concerning this case, please call 1-800-222-8477. Tips can also be left at the Snohomish County Sheriff's Tip Line at 425-388-3845. Callers may remain anonymous, although tips have been more successful when caller speaks with the detectives.
Welcome to Spokane, Washington. Unsolved Homicide Case 4. 13-year-old Russell Evans from Spokane, Washington had a passion for the sport of basketball, and he always dreamed of becoming a professional player. 13-year-old Evans attended basketball camps and transferred from private to public school to play better competition. Evans worked so hard to one day get a college scholarship to play the game he loved. Evans was described by his family that he was fun to be around. He was protective. He would give piggyback rides and hassle his younger sister. The 13-year-old Evans was an adventurous spirit. Evans had a lot of energy and loved to run around and explore. The 13-year-old Evans was athletic, super busy, and wouldn't stop moving. There was never a dull moment when Evans was around. Russell's dreams and the time he had to spend with those he loved were brought to a halt on June 4th, 1989. That night, 13-year-old Russell Evans was found beaten and ran over in the street after a hit and run. It has been over 3 decades since Russell's murder, but the impact it had on his family can still be felt to this day. Earlier that day, on June 4th, 1989, Evans and some of his friends got into an argument with 3 older teenagers over a girl. 13-year-old Evans diffused the situation. Before the older boys went away, reports say that one of the kids told Evans and his friends that one of you is going to die tonight. A few hours later, or so the story goes, a lady driving down the road found the 13-year-old Evans laying nearby. At that point, Evans was still conscious and yelling for his friend. 13-year-old Russell Evans would be transported to the hospital around 1 a.m., but succumbed to his injuries just a few hours later at 9 a.m. Russell's younger sister stated, "I remember sitting on my mom's lap as she explained that something happened and crying." To his younger sister, it was difficult to accept that her older brother was really gone. Younger sister went on to say, "When you're that young, the concept of death doesn't really register, so I thought he would be back. Didn't really sink in until I saw him not breathing at the viewing. I remember sitting in my mom's lap and crying once I realized what all this was meant." Russell Evans' close-knit cousin was staying at a friend's house that night. He believes that his parents were trying to protect him at that moment, but as he was the only one told of the accident the next morning. Cousin stated, "The next thing I really remember was my friend's sister looking at me and saying that I needed to go home. Look on her face is burned into my memory. My mom got out of her car and simply said that we lost him." The initial impact of Russell's death was something that had tremendous effect on his close-knit cousin. It was hard for the 13-year-old to see what happened with no explanation or reason. When the cousin got word of exactly what happened, he became very angry. He hated everyone, didn't trust anyone, and lashed out. It was a miracle he didn't end up dead. Russell Evans' family and friends had so many feelings of anger and frustration about why this had to happen and why nobody was doing anything about it. Although decades have passed since the cold case grew, the impact can still be felt through Russell's family. Each family member has dealt with the fallout in their own ways. Evans' family and friends faith that closure will come in this life or the next. The family has been active on Facebook sharing Russell's story and other Spokane area cold cases, hoping to bring more awareness to each of them. There was also a petition to the Spokane Police Department to establish a specific cold case unit to tackle the numerous unsolved crimes in their area. If you have any information on the unsolved murder of 13-year-old Russell Evans, please call the Spokane Police Department at 509-456-2233.
Welcome to Rochester, Washington. Unsolved Homicide. Case 5. On February 22, 2007, the lifeless body of 37-year-old Karen Bodine was found to the entrance of an old stone quarry outside of Rochester, Washington. Karen Bodine's life ended with her being murdered. The loving mother was suddenly found dead by the side of the road. The 37-year-old Karen Bodine was described as beautiful, a kind woman with a big heart. When Karen was in her 20s, she had 2 daughters and a son. Karen's kids were adopted by her parents, but she made sure she was still a big part of their lives. The 37-year-old lived with her boyfriend leading up to the incident, but had to leave because of a protection order. When police arrived at the death scene, Karen was found naked with her head resting on a car seat already at the site. There was no sign of a sexual assault, and the 37-year-old Bodine had been strangled to death with a ligature that was still around her neck. Authorities believe that Karen was left there on purpose so she would be found. The police looked into Karen's activity before her murder. In the days leading up to it, Karen Bodine was in a domestic violence situation with her boyfriend and had been served a protective order, which meant she couldn't stay at the same house. The family had also stated that 37-year-old Bodine had trouble with drugs and alcohol, but she did her best to keep things under control. So over the weekend, before January 22nd, Karen lived at a friend's house. It turned out that the house had multiple people visiting, staying over, and those people were involved with drugs. Witnesses reported seeing Karen alive around 3 a.m. on January 22, 2007, leaving the house on foot. This 37-year-old Bodine's body was found just a few hours later. The ligature around Karen's neck was tested and revealed a mixture of multiple DNA profiles. It was also reported that Karen Bodine was in an altercation with the owner of the house where she was living, but his DNA did not match the mixture found at the scene. There was witness reports regarding a car near the dump site just an hour before Karen was found murdered. There was one person of interest with a similar vehicle, but the car was scrapped before the police found out about it. The case has remained unsolved. The police have hope that advances in technology will allow them to separate the DNA mixture collected at the scene to identify an individual's profile. Karen Bodine's family maintains a Facebook page dedicated to keeping Karen's homicide investigation in the spotlight. Olivia, do you have anything you would like to add to any of these cases?
Yeah, just a few things I want to throw out there. The one that I read, the second one, could it be her fiance? He was in the Navy, right?
Yeah.
Because it had said that she kind of she knew the person. Do you think it was possible that he did something to her, or?
Well, I imagine they checked to see if he had an alibi.
Yeah.
I think that'd be the first thing I would do. You know.
A couple of things come to mind. Notorious serial killer that was in Washington. Israel Keys. You think he had anything to do with this? Because I'm sure murders that aren't accounted for by him, and he was in Washington a lot.
Yeah,
Washington
but
State.
I think at that time he would have been too young, because Keys died at a young age. So
Yeah, but only in the 2000s, I think. Right? He
yeah,
was around.
I believe that. Let me see what one we're talking here. Um,
I think he died in 2012, wasn't it?
yeah. Okay. Let me go back to this case. Okay.
No, just look at all of them because you don't know, especially the exotic dancer. Because remember the one in New Jersey he grabbed? Oh, she was a
Yeah.
drug addict, but wasn't there?
Okay. See, it's one about one she had a fiance in the Navy. It was clear back in '86. So
Right.
Keys would have been too
Now, I'm not
young.
talking about that, but I'm just
Yeah.
thinking of any of these cases. Like in the one is in 2007, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's one 2007.
And the exotic dancer, when was that? I don't remember.
That was okay. Okay, the last one was Karen Bodine, and that was in 2007.
Hmm.
Okay, and she was found by an old stone quarry. And Rochester, Washington. Yes, um, I'm not really sure on that, but I believe they might have looked at Keys for that because of the area.
Yeah,
But
yeah, because he liked to hike. I remember them saying.
yeah,
And also mentioning Washington, there now nothing to do with these cases, but I didn't realize it was a lot went on there, because you don't think of it as that type. Those states you don't think of, uh, you know, this craziness going on there. But they're saying now too that this, excuse me, this guy that killed those kids in Idaho. That
yeah.
there might be people in Washington that he killed too, along with people in Pennsylvania where he
Yeah.
lived. So,
Okay, yeah, in the state of Washington from 1980 to 2019, there was over 10,000 homicides, and
see, yeah,
they've solved over 7,000. That leaves like 2,700 still unsolved.
yeah, because they're looking at this kid for some of them. I don't know which ones it would be, but you know, it's crazy what goes on in those states. You don't think of that because Pacific Northwest is supposed to be beautiful, by the coast and everything.
Yeah, and one of the things it's very
Is it like,
isolated.
and also there's a lot of well, you get the Cascade Mountains, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of trails and stuff and hiking and ski places.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And we know what happens at ski resorts.
Yeah. Okay. I have a quote for you all. It has been said, time heals all wounds. I do not agree. The wounds remain. In time, the mind, protecting its sanity, covers them with scar tissue, and the pain lessens. But it is never gone. Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy. I
Mm.
want to thank Olivia for being on the show tonight. A special thanks to our viewers and listeners for tuning in, for you all have been so kind. Always remember, folks, that if you ever get bored with nothing to do, well, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised at what you might find. That's the end of our MJ podcast, the series Unsolved Crimes. This has been episode 11, part 7. 5 Washington Unsolved Homicide Cold Cases. We say to all of you, good night from Hudson, Florida.
Lonely shadows following me. Lonely ghosts come a calling. Lonely voices talking to me. Now I'm gone, now I'm gone, now I'm gone. And my mind calling my name out, lost in the fire.